Welcome to From the South. I'm Laura Prada from our Telesur studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin our news with our news, and we begin on electoral code. Millions voted across the United States on this Super Tuesday in a Democratic presidential race. Within the 14 states that are held in the voting polls, Sanders has established the majority of votes in Colorado and in Vermont. He also is taking the lead in Maine and Texas and won the cherry on the pie, California. Meanwhile, former Vice President Joe Biden has the victory in Alaska, Arkansas, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Virginia. Also took the lead in Massachusetts and Minnesota. Let's take a look at who is electing who in this Democratic primary. So far, 4 U.S. states have held their primaries, or caucuses: Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina. This Super Tuesday, 14 states are voting, plus the U.S. territory of Samoa and Democrats abroad, for a total of 1,357 delegates. The biggest are California and Texas, which contribute with 415 and 228 delegates respectively. After Super Tuesday, there will still be 2,467 delegates to elect in the remaining states. On our Telesur English and Spanish accounts in Facebook, you can find this following information. The 14 states participating in this Super Tuesday are Maine, California, Texas, Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, Colorado, Arkansas, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Utah, and Vermont, plus U.S. Samoa. And as we were saying before, this Super Tuesday, candidates had between them 155 delegates. This Super Tuesday, they have to win 1,357 delegates, marked in blue on our map on your screens. And after this Super Tuesday, they have still 2,467 delegates to win. And now we take a look at some of the current results recorded until now. We begin checking out the state of Alabama, where former Vice President Joe Biden leads with 63% of the votes, while Bernie Sanders stands on the second place with 16% of the vote. In the state of Arkansas, we have the following results. Joe Biden also taking the lead with 38% of the vote, and Bernie Sanders on the second place with 22% of the votes. The cherry on the pie, California, won by Bernie Sanders with 28% of the votes, and Michael Bloomberg standing in the second place with 19% of the delegates. In Colorado, we have these results. Bernie Sanders also with 36% of the vote, Joe Biden on the second place with 22% of the vote. We move on to the state of Maine, where Joe Biden won with 34% of the votes, while Bernie Sanders has 33% of the votes. Now we move on to Massachusetts, that was won by Joe Biden with 33% of the votes, and Bernie Sanders is standing in the second place with 27% of the votes. We keep moving on, checking on the states of Minnesota, Joe Biden leading with 38% of the votes, and Bernie Sanders with 30% of the votes. North Carolina, also Joe Biden leading with 45% of the votes, and Bernie Sanders on the second place with 25%. In Oklahoma, Joe Biden also 38% of the vote, Bernie Sanders second place with 25% of the vote. Now to Tennessee, Joe Biden with 41% of the votes, and Bernie Sanders on the second place with 24%. We keep moving on. In Texas, won by Bernie Sanders with 29%. Meanwhile, Joe Biden stands in the second place. Now moving on to Utah, Bernie Sanders also leading in this state with 32% of the vote, and Michael Bloomberg once again on the second place in this state with 19% of the vote. In Vermont, Bernie Sanders' home state, where his senator 50% of the votes, followed by Joe Biden with 22% of the votes. And last but not least, the state of Virginia, Joe Biden won with 53% of the vote, while Bernie Sanders follows on the second place with 23% of the votes. Earlier in a special show we spoke with Carlos Alzugaray, political analyst and diplomat, who joined us from Havana to analyze the outlook of the outgoing primaries in the United States.
It's very difficult to predict. The latest projection in several websites was that Biden would come out on top. It's a pity because Sanders has been doing so well, but it depends very much on what's going to happen in Texas, because Texas is a big prize, and there Sanders and Biden were running neck and neck. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see. In any case, if any of the two come out on top, it won't be a very big difference. And we will have to wait till the end of the primary season to learn who has a plurality of delegates. I don't think anyone can have the majority of delegates.
Alzugaray also spoke about the differences between Bernie Sanders and the current U.S. administration views on Latin American politics and issues.
On Latin America, Sanders is on record of saying, hey guys, we have been intervening in Latin America, we have been doing bad things in Latin America, and we have to stop doing that. He will certainly go back on the Monroe Doctrine. As we have it right now, Donald Trump is saying that the Monroe Doctrine is enforced. Sanders will say, no, the Monroe Doctrine is not enforced, and we are going to pursue a cooperation agenda with different governments. But we'll have to see.
We keep talking about elections. In this time, we move on to Guyana, where Election Commission HECOM has called for patience, saying preliminary results will be released later on Tuesday following the country's crucial polls on this Monday. Ballot counting is continuing in the presence of election observers, with official results expected in 1 week. So far, 139 regional results have been processed out of the more than 2,300, but it's too close to call. The South American country has held its general elections in the midst of a big oil boom and a year after a no-confidence vote was passed against the ruling president.
I will ask you to be very patient, and I will ask the members of the media who were really, well, they're very responsible. I notice you're very responsible at this point in time, to be a bit more patient with us. The results are trickling in, and the process of verification is being conducted. I will leave that to the CEO. The CEO will address you. But what I would tell you, our elections were, as promised. GCOM has delivered free, fair, and credible elections.
And like this, we come to a first break. Remember, follow us on Twitter at Telesur English and on my account at Laura P. Telesur. We'll be right back.
In a world infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, The American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide, deepening into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on Telesur.
We are back with our news. The Venezuelan government and the opposition have held discussions ahead of legislative elections this year. Speaking following the talks, National Assembly President Luis Parra says he is committed to working towards a peaceful electoral process.
We told them that we want to end this confrontation that's polarizing the country. We want to work towards rebuilding our institutions and get back in line with Bolivarian Republic's constitutional laws. We have to create new agreements and not follow the path of destruction by lying to the people of Venezuela and destroying their hope. They are waiting for us to resolve the issues affecting our country through peace and fair elections.
One of the most important figures of the independence movement in Puerto Rico, Rafael Cancel Miranda, died this Monday at the age of 89. Cancel Miranda is the last survivor of the group of 4 independence fighters who took part in a gun assault inside the U.S. Congress on March 1, 1954. The attack was designed to call international attention to the colonial situation of Puerto Rico. Let's hear the speech he gave back in 2019.
The United States wanted to sell us the idea that everything that came from them was the best. They tried to make us look as ungovernable. We can even teach them how to govern. I was in prison for 28 years in the US, and I know we can govern ourselves better than they can. Damn the day that they invaded us. It was our disgrace. Today, I'm not the 20-year-old man I was when the 4 of us did what we had to do in Washington. But I have the same spirit. I might not see very well due to my age, but my mind is perfect. If you want to be happy, dare to be yourselves and respect yourselves so you can fight for what you need to fight.
And Bolivia's former president Evo Morales has been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize by Argentinian activist Adolfo Pérez Esquivel, who won the same award in 1980 for his activism against dictatorships in Latin America. Pérez Esquivel wrote to the Norwegian Nobel Prize Committee touting Evo for raising Bolivia's GDP, reducing unemployment and extreme poverty, increasing minimum wage, as well as improving access to water, telecommunications, and electricity across the country. Pérez Esquivel wrote on Twitter, "I'm convinced that the Nobel Peace Prize for Evo Morales will be a fair recognition and an initiative in the struggle for inclusion, for the eradication of poverty, and for sustainable development." In Brazil, at least 13 people have been killed and 45 are missing as heavy rains hit the Brazilian state of Sao Paulo. The rains overnight caused landslides in the coastal city of Urajá, Santos, and São Vicente. Among the dead was a fireman who was buried as he tried unsuccessfully to save a mother and her baby son. The number of victims is being updated, and the fire service says there could be more landslides. Meanwhile, social organizations marched in Honduras to demand justice in the murder of environmentalist activist Berta Cáceres 4 years after. Families and supporters are demanding that the state prosecute the intellectual authors of the crime and not just the material authors. Cáceres led the fight to oppose the work of Company DESA for displacing the Lenca indigenous people from their ancestral territory and the contamination of their water.
This crime represents the plan to try to destroy the organized Fight for Land fight, which aims to build a new Honduras and which was led by Berta Cáceres. It seeks to create fear among activists.
Argentina and Chile have both confirmed their first cases of COVID-19 virus in patients who recently returned from abroad. A 43-year-old Argentinian man had returned from Italy, while a 33-year-old Chilean man had spent a month in Southeast Asia. Health Minister Ginés González Garcia said the Argentinian patient has been in isolation since presenting himself to a private health clinic and confirmed Argentina was prepared to tackle the virus, while Chile's health minister Jaime Mañalich said the Chilean patient had been taken to hospital in the city of Talca.
The patient has collaborated closely with all authorities. Obviously, he stays admitted at the hospital. Fortunately, his diagnosis is a mild complexity. The man was in several places in Europe, but mainly in northern Italy. He is a passenger who traveled first class, which limits close contacts.
Meanwhile, Iran's health ministry has announced that 11 more people have died from the new coronavirus in one day, bringing the Islamic Republic's overall death toll to 77.
According to the latest figures, the number of new cases of virus infections is 835, and 11 people have died. The overall number of patients is 2,336, and the number of those who have died so far is 77.
And the last patient has been discharged from an Ebola treatment center in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The patient Masika Mawasu Semida was the last patient to be admitted at the center located in Beni. The World Health Organization reported on Monday about the decline in Ebola cases, and Beni was noted as the only area left with a patient. The World Health Organization said if 42 days pass without a new case being recorded, they will be able to declare an end to the Ebola epidemic.
Those who say that Ebola doesn't exist are wrong, because I've suffered from it.
Once this case is released, once they are cured, we can now count the 42 days before we can declare the end of the epidemic.
Time for a short break. Stay tuned with us.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Earth. Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur.
We are back with our news. South African trade unions have threatened to go on a strike if the government fails to honor a wage agreement signed in 2018. According to this agreement, civil servants are supposed to receive a 7% wage increase effective April 1st, 2020. However, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has said the deal needs to be renegotiated. He argues the deal goes against his plan to reduce the wage bill by $10 billion over the next 3 years. The unions, however, insist that they have no intention to reopen matters that were settled 2 years ago. Ethiopia has accused the United States of being undiplomatic in its interference in a row over a giant dam on the Nile River. These follow attempts by the U.S. to influence the outcome of talks between Ethiopia and Egypt on the construction of the dam proposed in 2011. The row stemmed from Cairo's concerns that the project might cause water shortages in Egypt. After offering to facilitate the talks, the U.S. recently issued a statement claiming an agreement has been made, which Ethiopia has dismissed as untrue.
The recent statement by the U.S. we believe is undiplomatic and does not reflect a great nation like this. We hope they will revise their statement.
In France, thousands of demonstrators have marched across the country against pension reforms and the use of the 49.3 motion by the government, which allows laws to be ratified without a vote. Unions and social movements called for protests after Prime Minister Edouard Philippe announced that the government would use a legal tool of the French Constitution, Article 49.3, to pass the controversial reforms after only 13 days of debates. The protesters said the government's decision is an attack on democracy and undermines the people's elected representatives.
This is a form of denial of democracy, since the members who submitted amendments who were working on the reform are elected representatives of the people. This is an issue of contempt for the French.
And there have been scenes of chaos on the Greek island of Lesbos, and police confronted migrants to block them from crossing to the mainland. Several migrants were injured as police barred their way and pushed them back. Other groups of migrants who arrived on other parts of the island over the last few days have not been allowed to go to the main Moria camp and have been housed temporarily at the port. At the Turkish border with Greece, thousands of migrants have been left stranded after Greece suspended processing asylum requests. Almost 25,000 migrants are reported to be stuck on the border, and some opted to return to nearby Turkish villages. The Greek police are alleged to have shot and injured some who were trying to cross into Greece.
We were taken from the border crossing at Ipsala to here, but in Greece, the policemen fired at us. They wouldn't let us pass. Many were wounded. They are still there. We had nothing to eat, nothing to drink, so we had to turn back to the Turkish villages.
While touring the Greek-Turkish border with European Union officials, the Greek Prime Minister blamed Europe for failing to deal with the migrant crisis. However, earlier, the European Union had promised 700 billion euros to Greece to deal with the migrant issue.
Europe has failed to find a common solution to this migration problem. Some closed their eyes and left the countries with external borders to deal alone with this crisis. Your presence here is the best proof that this is changing.
Palestinian resistance movement said the victory of Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party is a threat to regional peace. Palestine chief negotiator Saeb Erekat said Netanyahu's threat to annex large parts of the occupied West Bank will only lead to more violence and chaos in the region. Netanyahu last week pledged to annex the Jordan Valley, a large part of the occupied West Bank, if he won and formed the next government.
From the preliminary results of the Israeli elections, it's obvious that apartheid settlements, annexation, have won the elections. And it seems to me that Mr. Netanyahu believes that conflict is what serves Israel's purposes of prosperity and strength. And he is forcing on us, Israelis and Palestinians, and the whole region actually, to live by the sword.
We move on. China is threatening to retaliate against U.S. bullying after Washington ordered 4 of the country's media outlets that operate in the states to slash their staff by 40%. The Trump administration has insisted that the number of Chinese journalists be reduced from 160 to 100.
The U.S. is firmly entrenched in the Cold War mentality and ideological bias, from registering foreign agents to listing as foreign diplomatic groups to the so-called limit on personnel numbers that enacted the expulsion of Chinese media reporters stationed in the U.S. It has continuously escalated its oppressive actions against Chinese reporters, seriously interfering with the Chinese media's normal reporting activities in the U.S.
This March 3rd is World Wildlife Day, and this year's theme is Sustaining All Life on Earth. Proposed by Thailand, World Wildlife Day was created by United Nations in 2013 to celebrate and raise awareness of the world's wild fauna and flora by overexploiting wildlife habitats and ecosystems. Humanity is endangering both itself and the survival of countless species of wild plants and animals. Today, close to a quarter of all species on the planet are in danger of becoming extinct in the next decades. With these images of the wildlife and to save it, we come to the end of News Brief. Of course, we invite you to follow us on our website, telesurenglish.net, where you can do follow-up to the most outstanding information happening around the world. And of course, the invitation is made for you to do follow-up to these primary elections in the United States, among other information on our website. You continue with us with Telesur, always together, connecting our global thousands. Next time.